You're just a bit too slow for me now, Dave. The delicate clinking of silverware at L'Eclipse, a restaurant so pretentious it didn't put dollar signs on the menu, just ominous, solitary numbers, seemed to stop entirely. The ambient, smooth jazz playing from the corner piano suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. I stared at Chloe across the expanse of pristine white linen, the $300 bottle of vintage champagne I'd just ordered, still bubbling merrily in its crystal bucket. She was wearing the emerald green silk dress I'd bought her last week to celebrate this exact night. Her brand new, freshly printed degree in advanced dentistry was practically glowing like a radioactive halo around her perfectly styled balayaged hair. I blinked. Once. Twice. I let the word hang in the air, suspended over the plate of pan-seared scallops that had cost more than my first car. Slow? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. I didn't raise it. I didn't cause a scene. I just looked at her. Do you mean physically slow? Because I'm fairly certain I hauled all 60 boxes of your medical textbooks up 3 flights of stairs to our apartment last month while you supervised from the sofa. Or do you mean mentally slow? Because I'm absolutely positive I'm the one who rebuilt your entire thesis formatting when your MacBook crashed 2 days before your defense. Chloe sighed. It was a heavy theatrical sound, accompanied by a practiced, pitying look, the exact look she usually reserved for telemarketers, slow waitstaff, or anyone who didn't instantly recognize her sheer brilliance. "Don't do that, Dave. Please, don't make this ugly," she murmured, leaning forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as if she were delivering a terminal diagnosis. "You know exactly what I mean. I'm a doctor now." She paused, letting the title roll around in her mouth like a piece of fine chocolate. "I have a certain trajectory. My life is about to change drastically." "Go on," I said, picking up my water glass. The ice clinked against the rim. My heart was starting a slow, heavy thud against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. "I'll be attending galas," she explained, her eyes taking on a glassy, ambitious sheen. "I'll be networking with elite surgeons, building a high-end cosmetic practice, mingling with people who shape the city. And you, well, you manage digital operations." She said the word operations the way someone else might say plague. "You track spreadsheets for a living, Dave," she continued, her tone patronizingly soft. "You sit in front of a monitor. You organize ClickUp boards. You manage video backlogs for content creators. You live your life in Slack channels and Notion workspaces. You get excited about beta testing new client review tools like Flask instead of Frame. It's comfortable. And that's sweet. It really is. You're a very sweet, comfortable guy. But it's just not the pace I'm moving at anymore. I'm entering a completely different echelon, and I need a partner who operates on my level." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I could taste the faint tang of iron in my mouth from where my teeth were currently biting into the inside of my cheek. For 4 years, my sweet, comfortable life had consisted of waking up at 5 a.m. to coordinate global production timelines. I worked grueling 60-hour weeks as an independent contractor, managing erratic clients, putting out massive digital fires, and optimizing workflows just to keep our heads above water. I lived on instant ramen, generic cold brew, and sheer willpower so that she could live on organic salads, artisanal lattes, and unbothered study sessions. I skipped vacations. I drove a 10-year-old Corolla that made a terrifying grinding noise in third gear. I spent hours mapping out my state and city tax deductions as a 1099 worker, agonizing over every single penny just to squeeze out a few extra $1,000 to pour into the black hole of her tuition. I did it all so she wouldn't have to stress. I absorbed all the friction of our lives so she could glide flawlessly across the ice. "So, let me make sure I have the sequence of events correct," I said, leaning back in my chair. The ergonomic posture I usually maintained at my desk vanished, replaced by a rigid, coiled stillness. "We celebrate your graduation. I order the champagne. You happily eat your $90 filet mignon. And then, for dessert, your grand toast is to dump me because my digital project management lifestyle is holding you back from rubbing elbows with plastic surgeons." "It's not just the lifestyle," she snapped. Her veneer of gentle pity cracked, revealing the ugly, jagged entitlement underneath. "It's ambition, Dave. You don't have the drive to navigate the circles I'm entering. You don't understand how to play the game. You're just a stepping stone." The words hung there. A stepping stone. She winced, just a fraction, realizing she had said the quiet part out loud. But she recovered quickly, lifting her chin in defiance. "I didn't want to say it that way, but you forced it by being stubborn. I appreciate everything you've done for me during school. I really do. You were a great support system, but I'm stepping off now. We're done." She reached down beside her chair and picked up her purse. It was a vintage, limited edition designer piece. I knew exactly how limited it was because I had scoured the internet for 3 weeks, negotiating with a reseller in Tokyo to secure it for her birthday. "I paid the valet already," she said smoothly, standing up and smoothing out the silk dress I had bought her. "Enjoy the champagne. Consider it a parting gift for everything. We can sort out the apartment logistics on Monday." She didn't wait for a response. With a swish of expensive fabric and a waft of the Tom Ford perfume I'd restocked in her vanity last month, she turned on her heel and walked out of the restaurant. I watched her weave through the tables, drawing admiring glances from the other patrons, stepping into her bright, glittering high society future. She left me sitting alone at a table for two, staring at a $300 check, with a hole in my chest where my future used to be. Any normal guy would have broken down. Any normal guy might have chased her out the door, begging her to reconsider, pleading with her to remember the late nights, the sacrifices, the unconditional support, or maybe a normal guy would have flipped the table, yelled obscenities, and made a spectacular viral scene. But I didn't cry. I didn't chase her. I didn't even flag down the waiter to complain. I just sat there. I listened to the jazz piano. I looked at the bubbles rising in the crystal flute of champagne she hadn't touched. And then, very slowly, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It wasn't a sad, resigned smile either. It was a sharp, dangerous, deeply terrifying smile. It was the kind of smile that meant someone was about to learn a very painful, astronomically expensive lesson in basic reading comprehension. You see, Chloe made a fatal miscalculation. She looked at my hoodies, my modest car, and my quiet, unglamorous job, and she assumed I was simple. She thought that because I didn't use big, pretentious medical terminology to sound smart, I was just a walking ATM with a heart of gold and a brain made of mush. She assumed that my entire existence was just setting up Slack channels and being a dutiful servant to her genius. But what she fundamentally failed to understand is the mind of a high-level digital operations manager. My entire career is built on anticipating failure. I don't just manage projects, I mitigate catastrophic risks. I build foolproof systems. I spot anomalies in massive, sprawling data sets. I coordinate cross-functional teams of highly volatile creatives and ensure they hit their targets with zero margin for error. My brain is hardwired to look at a complex, chaotic situation, break it down into its core components, and identify the single point of failure. I read contracts for a living. I look for the loopholes. I find the flaws in the architecture. And I absolutely never, ever deploy a system without establishing a rock-solid, ironclad contingency plan. I never hand over administrative rights without keeping a master key. When she had walked out, calling me a stepping stone, she thought she was leaving me behind in the dust. She thought she was clean, free, and completely unencumbered. She had no idea that she was currently standing in the center of a perfectly designed, flawlessly executed operational trap. I reached across the table, grabbed the bottle of vintage champagne from the ice bucket, and poured myself a generous glass. The condensation dripped onto the white linen. I took a slow, savoring sip. It tasted like victory. It tasted like cold, hard math. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My lock screen was still a picture of the two of us, smiling on a beach a year ago. I stared at her face for a second, feeling the last lingering ghost of my affection evaporate, replaced entirely by cold operational efficiency. A stepping stone, she had called me. I unlocked the phone, swiped past my Notion and ClickUp apps, and opened my mobile banking portal. The facial recognition scanned me in. The dashboard loaded, displaying my checking account, my business accounts, and right at the bottom, my high-yield investment portfolio. The numbers glowed on the screen. It was a staggering amount of money. Money I had bled for. Money I had sacrificed my youth, my comfort, and my sanity to accumulate. Chloe assumed my job was a dead end because I wasn't flashy. She didn't realize that standardizing workflows, resolving massive video production backlogs, and architecting operational strategies for high-tier media clients paid incredibly well if you knew how to leverage your contracts. I wasn't just comfortable. I was silently, ruthlessly stacking cash. She had mocked my spreadsheets. She was about to find out exactly what was on those spreadsheets. I took another sip of the champagne, leaning back in the plush leather booth. The waiter nervously approached the table, glancing at the empty chair across from me. "Is everything all right, sir? Will the lady be returning?" he asked, his voice dripping with practiced discretion. "No," I said, my smile widening into something that made the waiter take a subtle half-step back. The lady will not be returning. In fact, the lady has moved on to a completely different trajectory. She's going to be attending galas. I see, sir. Shall I clear her plates? Please do, I said cheerfully. And bring me the check. I'm celebrating. Celebrating, sir? If you don't mind my asking, what's the occasion? I looked at the glowing screen of my phone, at the financial dashboard that held the absolute total destruction of Dr. Chloe's newly minted high society life. I just successfully closed out a very long, very tedious project, I told him, tossing my heavy metal credit card onto the silver tray. And I'm about to initiate the offboarding process. The offboarding process had actually been architected 4 years ago on a muggy Tuesday in August. That was the day the acceptance letter arrived from the university's College of Dental Medicine. I remembered her screaming with joy, jumping into my arms in our cramped one-bedroom apartment. I had spun her around, genuinely thrilled. She had worked so hard for her undergrad grades, and this was her dream. Then, she opened the attached PDF detailing the estimated cost of attendance. The joy evaporated instantly, replaced by a suffocating, hyperventilating panic. $220,000. It was a staggering, astronomical number. For a kid who grew up middle class and had never seen a bank balance over 5 digits, it looked like a death sentence. Chloe collapsed onto our cheap IKEA sofa, burying her face in her hands, sobbing that it was over. She said she couldn't take on that kind of debt, that it would crush her, that her life was ruined before it even began. I sat beside her, rubbing her back, my mind instantly shifting into the gear it always did when a client presented a massive, seemingly insurmountable logistical nightmare. I didn't see a tragedy. I saw a resource allocation problem. I saw a project that needed a manager. Hey, I had said softly, pulling her hands away from her tear-streaked face. Look at me. You got in. You earned this. You are going to be a doctor. I can't afford it, Dave, she choked out. You don't need to worry about the cost, I told her, making the promise that would define the next 4 years of my life. I will take care of the financial burden. I'll handle the administrative mess. I will build a system. All you have to do is go to class, study, and focus on becoming the best dentist in this city. Leave the logistics to me. She had looked at me like I was a superhero. At that moment, I think she truly loved me. But a project manager knows that a goal without a system is just a wish. So, I built a system. The very next week, I sat her down at our tiny kitchen table with her MacBook. I had already set up her student portal logins and routed all the primary administrative emails to a secure folder in my own workspace. Okay, I said, pointing to the screen. I need you to e-sign these intake forms. It's the standard onboarding paperwork for the university's financial aid and registrar's office. Once this is done, the system will automatically process the disbursements every semester, and your tuition will be covered. You won't ever have to look at a bill. Chloe, still emotionally exhausted from the roller coaster of the week, barely glanced at the screen. She trusted me completely. She clicked the digital signature boxes, entered her social security number where prompted, and hit submit. Done, she sighed, closing the laptop. So I don't have to worry about the money? Not at all, I smiled, kissing her forehead. Your portal will show a zero balance every semester. It's totally handled. What I didn't explicitly spell out, because I wanted to protect her from the crushing anxiety she had displayed on the couch, was the specific mechanism of how it was handled. I wasn't liquidating my meager savings to pay the university directly. I wasn't a millionaire. The forms she had blindly e-signed were the master promissory notes for federal unsubsidized loans and a supplemental private graduate loan. A master promissory note is a beautiful piece of bureaucratic architecture. You sign it once in your first year, and it legally binds you to all subsequent loans taken out for the duration of your program. It is a legally ironclad agreement between the borrower, in this case Chloe, and the federal government, as well as a private banking institution. Every semester, like clockwork, the loan servicer dispersed the funds directly to the university. The university's ledger credited the funds to her account. So, whenever Chloe sporadically logged into her student portal to check her class schedule, she saw a magnificent, comforting account balance $0. She saw that zero, and she assumed my digital contracting business was just quietly, magically printing cash to pay her way. The reality was vastly different. To maintain the illusion, to cover our skyrocketing rent, her living expenses, her textbooks, and her lab fees, which the loans didn't fully stretch to cover without maxing out our credit, I had to turn myself into a machine. While Chloe was attending orientation mixers and complaining about the reading load for her anatomy classes, I was practically living at my desk. I transitioned from a standard independent contractor to a full-blown, one-man production agency. My life became a blur of Google Calendars, Slack notifications, and relentless problem-solving. I remember one specific month, during her second year, when I was managing an absolutely catastrophic 16-video backlog for a major YouTube client. Their internal team had completely dropped the ball, and they brought me in to fix it. For 4 weeks straight, I slept in 4-hour shifts. I was coordinating corporate video production timelines, tracking down rogue editors across 3 different time zones, managing crew action items, and aggressively updating budget trackers for an automated routines video project that was hemorrhaging money. I lived in a state of perpetual exhaustion. My diet devolved into instant ramen, whatever I could microwave in under 3 minutes, and gallons of black generic coffee. I drove a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla that sounded like a blender full of gravel every time I pushed it past 40 miles an hour, refusing to spend a single dime on a mechanic unless the car literally stopped moving. I wore the same 5 hoodies on rotation. I gave up my gym membership and worked out by doing push-ups in our living room while listening to client feedback calls on speakerphone. I became a ghost in my own life so she could shine in hers. And shine, she did. As the semesters rolled by, Chloe transformed. The scared, grateful girl who had cried on the IKEA sofa vanished, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Dental school didn't just educate her. It fundamentally altered her ego. She was surrounded by the children of wealthy doctors, trust fund babies who drove BMWs to the clinic and spent their weekends at ski resorts. She started adapting to their baseline. It started small. The generic groceries I bought were suddenly too processed. She needed organic, locally sourced produce, which I ordered and paid for. The coffee I made at home was too acidic. She needed a daily $6 artisanal latte from the cafe near the medical campus. Then it escalated. By her 3rd year, she was insisting on buying designer scrubs. When her old laptop started running slow, she threw a terrifying temper tantrum until I fronted the cash for a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro, despite the fact that I was still working on a refurbished rig with a sticky space bar. Her attitude toward me shifted from partnership to subtle, grating condescension. She started introducing herself as a doctor long before she actually graduated. She would come home from clinic, drop her designer bag, which I had bought her, on the counter, and immediately start complaining about her day, expecting me to drop everything to cater to her. "Dave, my shoulders are killing me from leaning over patients all day," she would say, waving a hand dismissively at my dual monitors. "Can you pause your little spreadsheets and give me a massage? And I'm starving. Order sushi. Not from the cheap place, the good one downtown." I would be in the middle of resolving a critical render failure for a client deliverable that was due in 20 minutes, but I would mute my microphone, rub her shoulders, and order the $70 sushi on my credit card. She began to view my grueling work ethic not as a sacrifice for her benefit, but as a lack of refinement. Because I worked from home in sweatpants, furiously typing away to coordinate production schedules and ensure her loan disbursements went through flawlessly, she decided my career was inherently inferior to hers. She didn't see the complex operational tracking setups I built in Notion. She just saw a guy staring at a screen. She didn't see the grueling client negotiations. She just heard me using a customer service voice. She started making little jabs in front of her friends. We would be at a rare dinner party, and someone would ask what I did. "Oh, Dave manages digital content." Chloe would sigh, rolling her eyes affectionately like she was describing a golden retriever that had somehow learned to use a keyboard. "He tracks things for YouTubers. It's very cute, but it's not exactly saving lives. I told him he should look into medical administration, at least be adjacent to a real profession, but he likes his comfortable little bubble." I would just smile and take a sip of my drink, swallowing the absolute white-hot rage building in my chest. Because the greatest tragedy of it all was that I wasn't doing this to trap her. My original plan wasn't malicious. In fact, it was the most blindly, foolishly romantic thing I had ever attempted in my life. I knew she was taking on $250,000 in debt. I knew the interest rates were brutal, but I also knew that my business was quietly exploding. By being absolutely ruthless with my 1099 tax deductions and living like a monk, my profit margins were massive. Every single month, after I paid our rent, bought her organic groceries, and funded her lifestyle, I took every remaining dollar of my income and dumped it into a highly aggressive, meticulously managed investment portfolio. I was building a mountain of cash in the dark. My goal was to hit $220,000 by the time she walked across the stage to get her diploma. I had this vivid, pathetic fantasy that played in my head during my darkest, most exhausting nights. I imagined our wedding day. I imagined standing there in a rented tuxedo, looking at her in a beautiful white dress. And for my wedding gift to her, instead of jewelry or a trip, I was going to hand her a printed receipt from her loan servicer. A receipt showing a single massive wire transfer that wiped out every single cent of her debt. I wanted to give her a clean slate. I wanted to buy her freedom so she could start her career without a chain around her neck. I was willing to sacrifice my 20s, my comfort, and my pride to give her the world on a silver platter. But as I sat in the restaurant, listening to the jazz piano and looking at the empty chair where she had just sat and called me a stepping stone, that fantasy died a violent, instant death. She didn't want my sacrifice. She didn't want my partnership. She just wanted the pedestal I had built for her. And now that she was standing on top of it, she was ready to kick me down to the dirt. I picked up my phone again. The screen was still glowing with the dashboard of my investment account. The balance sat there, a bright, bold number. $228,450.12. It was more than enough. The wire transfer to her loan servicer was already queued up, scheduled to automatically execute at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. It was meant to be a surprise graduation gift. I stared at the number, feeling a strange absolute clarity wash over me. The exhaustion of the last 4 years vanished, replaced by a cold operational precision. I tapped the screen. Cancel scheduled transfer. I hit yes. A little green checkmark appeared. The money stayed in my account. The safety net I had woven with my own bare hands vanished from beneath her. Then, I opened a new tab and logged into her student loan servicer account. I navigated to the profile settings. I deleted my email address from the primary contact field and replaced it with her new professional iCloud address. I changed the phone number. And finally, I navigated to the billing preferences and unchecked the box for paper statements, ensuring every single catastrophic notification going forward would be sent directly to her phone. The trap was set. The safety protocols were disengaged. I finished my champagne, paid the $300 bill, and walked out into the cool night air. I had a lot of work to do. I had an apartment to pack up, a life to reclaim, and a very comfortable, very wealthy future to start living. The drive back from the restaurant was the most surreal, peaceful 20 minutes of my entire life. I rolled the windows down in my decade-old Corolla, letting the crisp night air whip through the cabin, completely drowning out the terrifying grinding noise the transmission always made in third gear. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't instantly start calculating how many freelance hours I'd have to pull to afford a mechanic. I didn't care if the car exploded at the next intersection. Because for the first time in 4 years, my money was finally, irrevocably, mine. I parked on the street a few blocks from our apartment, taking my time walking up to the building. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the silence of the space hit me like a physical wave. The air smelled heavily of the expensive Tom Ford perfume Chloe had sprayed before we left. Her designer heels were kicked off haphazardly in the entryway, right where I always tripped over them. A half-drank artisanal latte sat sweating on the kitchen island next to a pile of mail I had sorted, and her medical textbooks were strewn across the sofa where she had been lounging earlier. Normally, I would immediately transition into janitor mode. I would put the shoes in her closet, wipe down the island, dump the latte, and stack her textbooks neatly so she wouldn't be stressed when she woke up. Tonight, I walked right past it all. I headed straight for the second bedroom, which I had converted into my home office. It was the only room in the apartment she never entered, claiming the hum of my servers and the clacking of my mechanical keyboard ruined her zen. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, booted up my custom-built dual-monitor rig, and cracked my knuckles. At the restaurant, I had hastily canceled the wire transfer and changed the primary contact email on her loan profile from my phone. But that was just the tactical retreat. Now it was time for the scorched earth policy. I was a digital operations manager. I didn't leave loose ends. I opened a secure browser and navigated directly to her federal and private student loan servicer portals. I bypassed the two-factor authentication because, naturally, it was tied to my own authenticator app. Once the dashboard loaded on my massive ultra-wide monitor, the true gravity of what she had done to herself was displayed in high-definition, unyielding numbers. Total principal balance, $220,000. Accrued uncapitalized interest, $8,450.12. Blended interest rate, 7.5%. She had a 6-month grace period before the federal loans entered active repayment, but the private loans were going to demand their pound of flesh much sooner. And when that grace period ended, all that accrued interest was going to capitalize, meaning it would be added to her principal, and she would start paying interest on her interest. A quick calculation on my notepad told me her standard 10-year amortization schedule was going to demand a monthly payment of roughly $2,600 every single month for 10 years without fail. I navigated to the payment settings. I found the autopay configuration, which was, of course, linked to my primary business checking account. With a single click of my mouse, I deleted the routing number. I purged my billing address. I wiped every single trace of my financial identity from her portal. Then I went into the notification architecture. I made absolutely certain that paperless billing was locked in. No physical letters would ever arrive at our apartment, or her mother's house, or anywhere else. Every single late notice, every capitalization warning, every catastrophic financial update was now hard-coded to ping the pristine professional iCloud email address she had set up for her new cosmetic dentistry networking. I even added her new cell phone number for SMS text alerts. I wanted her phone to buzz with the weight of her own arrogance every single billing cycle. Finally, I generated a PDF export of the complete audit trail, every digital signature, every IP address log from her MacBook every time she had logged in and checked a box, and saved it to a secure encrypted folder on my hard drive. Just in case she actually tried to follow through on a frivolous lawsuit, I had the cryptographic proof that Dr. Chloe had eagerly, legally bound herself to $250,000 in debt. I logged out. I cleared the cache. I deleted the passwords from my manager. The digital severance was complete. The bomb was armed, the timer was ticking, and she was blissfully unaware, probably sipping cocktails in a penthouse somewhere, talking about her trajectory. I spun my chair around, looking out the door of my office at the apartment we had shared. It was 11:30 p.m. I had a massive surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins, and I needed to burn it off. It was time for the physical offboarding. I walked down to the basement of our building, where the super kept a stack of broken-down cardboard boxes and heavy-duty packing tape for the recycling. I hauled a dozen of them back up the stairs. I wasn't angry as I taped the bottoms of the boxes. I wasn't crying. I felt like a warehouse manager executing a highly efficient midnight inventory purge. I started in the bathroom. I swept my arm across the marble vanity, knocking hundreds of dollars worth of organic serums, exfoliants, and imported moisturizers into a box. I didn't bother with bubble wrap. If a bottle of her $60 toner leaked onto her flat iron, that was a problem for the new high society Chloe to deal with. I packed her electric toothbrush, her silk pillowcases, her monogrammed towels. I stripped the bathroom of everything that wasn't generic soap and my own razor. Next was the bedroom. I opened her massive walk-in closet, the one I had surrendered entirely to her, keeping my 5 hoodies and 3 pairs of jeans in a dresser in the hallway. I pulled her silk dresses, her designer scrubs, her blazers, and her cocktail gowns off the hangers by the handful and dropped them into the cardboard boxes. I tossed her shoes in like I was bagging groceries. The vintage designer purse I had bought her, the one she had walked out of the restaurant with, was obviously with her. But I found the authenticity cards and the dust bag and threw those in too. I moved with a relentless mechanical rhythm. The living room was next. Her textbooks, her throw pillows, her decorative candles that smelled like sandalwood and entitlement all went into the cardboard void. By 4 a.m., there were 10 heavily taped boxes stacked neatly by the front door. The apartment looked bare, echoing, and entirely mine. I pulled out my laptop, logged onto a freight shipping website, and scheduled a morning pickup. I paid the premium fee to have the courier carry the boxes out of the apartment and deliver them directly to her mother's house in the suburbs. I texted her mother a brief, polite message. Chloe and I have ended our relationship. I have shipped all of her belongings to your address via courier. They will arrive by noon. Please do not contact me. Then, I blocked her mother's number. I blocked Chloe's friends. I went into my phone and scrubbed every trace of her from my contacts, my social media, and my photo albums. I took a hot shower, crawled into my newly empty bed, and fell into the deepest, most restful sleep I had experienced in 4 long years. I woke up the next morning at 9 a.m. There was no one demanding an artisanal latte. There was no one complaining about the temperature of the apartment. There was only sunlight streaming through the windows and the beautiful, silent peace of an empty room. The courier arrived at 10 a.m., carting the boxes away and leaving me with a perfectly clean slate. Over the next few weeks, I didn't just survive, I absolutely thrived. The sudden absence of Chloe's emotional and financial vampirism left me with an ocean of free time, boundless energy, and zero stress. I used some of my massive, untouched savings to immediately upgrade my life in the small, meaningful ways I had denied myself for years. I bought a high-end espresso machine, a brand new ergonomic desk setup, and I finally took my Corolla to the mechanic, handing him a blank check to fix the transmission and replace everything that rattled. But mostly, I poured my newfound energy directly into my work. Without having to play the role of a subservient boyfriend, my professional output skyrocketed to a terrifying level of efficiency. I was managing digital production for Dragonfruit Media, and I decided it was time to stop operating in the shadows and start dominating the space. My biggest client was a massive YouTube entrepreneur named Olaf Gudema. His channel was a juggernaut, but his internal operations were a chaotic nightmare. For months, his team had been drowning in a legendary backlog of 16 outstanding long-form videos. The client account was bleeding money, and the internal team was panicking. The old Dave, the Dave who was exhausted from carrying his girlfriend's ego, would have just kept his head down, tracked the spreadsheets, and gently nudged the editors. The new Dave decided to take over. I ripped up their existing workflow and built an entirely new production schedule from scratch. I initiated an aggressive internal operational test, shifting their archaic review systems away from their bloated legacy software and forcing the entire team to adopt a much leaner, faster alternative tool called Flask. For a flagship project we codenamed LF22 Panda Express, I drafted a flawless tactical brief. I bypassed the usual middle managers and went straight to the heavy hitters on the Adam Guild account team. I coordinated with Steve and Michael to secure instant channel access, distributed massive ideation batches to Heatherlyn and Olene, and effectively strong-armed the entire creative pipeline into submission. I didn't just clear the backlog of 16 videos. I automated their entire monthly output routine, slashing their production time in half and saving the client tens of thousands of dollars in wasted editor retainers. 3 weeks after the breakup, I was invited to a high-level Zoom call with Olaf and the executive team. I logged in wearing one of my comfortable hoodies, sipping an espresso from my new machine. They didn't just thank me. They were completely blown away by the infrastructure I had built. They offered me an exclusive, long-term contract as their director of operations, tripling my monthly retainer and giving me a percentage of the back-end ad revenue for every video that passed through my new Flask workflow. I clicked accept on the digital contract, closed my laptop, and leaned back in my chair. I opened my banking app on my phone. The $228,450.12 was still sitting right there in my high-yield portfolio. It had actually grown a bit from the interest. I smiled. I wasn't just comfortable anymore. I was wealthy, I was respected, and I was completely, utterly free. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching real estate in up-and-coming neighborhoods, looking for a duplex I could buy in cash to start building passive rental income. My life was moving at warp speed, and it was entirely on my own terms. I didn't need galas. I didn't need plastic surgeon networking events. I had a digital empire, a bulletproof operational workflow, and a bank account that let me sleep like a rock every single night. Chloe had wanted a partner on her level. Looking at the trajectory of my life, I realized with a cold, absolute certainty, she was right. I was moving entirely too fast for her. It was a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month and 4 days after the disastrous dinner at L'Eclipse, when the trap finally snapped shut. I was sitting in my newly upgraded home office, leaning back in a $2,000 Herman Miller chair that I had purchased in cash. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow over my dual monitor setup. On the left screen, I had the back-end analytics for Olaf Gudema's latest YouTube upload. It was currently pulling in 3 million views in under 48 hours, and my revenue share dashboard was ticking upward like a beautiful green slot machine. On the right screen, I was browsing commercial real estate listings. I had my eye on a stunning, fully renovated brick duplex in a historic district. I was running the amortization schedules, calculating cap rates, and casually debating whether I should put down 40% in cash or just buy the entire property outright, using the investment portfolio I had originally built for Chloe. Life was not just good, it was a frictionless, flawlessly optimized machine. I had completely purged my apartment, my schedule, and my mind of the high-maintenance void that used to be my relationship. Then, my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced down. The caller ID flashed a number I hadn't seen in weeks, but one I had memorized over 4 years. Chloe. I didn't reach for it. I just watched it vibrate across the smooth wood of my desk, listening to the low, buzzing hum. It stopped. 30 seconds later, it started again. Then, the screen lit up with a rapid-fire barrage of text messages, each one appearing in a frantic, capitalized sequence that told me everything I needed to know. Dave. Pick up the phone. Dave. What did you do? What the hell did you do? Answer the phone, you psychopath. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute serenity of my office. I picked up my ceramic mug, took a sip of perfectly brewed Ethiopian espresso, and gently tapped the screen to answer the third incoming call. I didn't say a word. I just put the phone on speaker and set it back down on the desk. "What did you do?" Her voice exploded through the phone's tiny speakers, completely stripped of its usual haughty, practiced elegance. It was a shrill, hyperventilating shriek, the sound of someone in utter, unadulterated freefall. She sounded like she was standing in a public space, echoing slightly. In the background, I could hear the faint, ambient sounds of smooth jazz and the polite murmur of hushed professional conversations. "I'm going to need you to be a lot more specific, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice incredibly mild like a customer service representative dealing with a confused toddler. "Did you leave a sweater at the apartment? Because I'm pretty sure I boxed everything up and had the courier deliver it directly to your mother's porch. If you're missing a designer scrub top, take it up with FedEx." "My credit report!" she screamed, her voice cracking in a way that was frankly music to my ears. "My credit report, Dave. I just went to the dealership." I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers behind my head. "The dealership? Buying a car? Good for you. I thought you'd be moving into a penthouse first." "I was doing both," she wailed, panic utterly overriding her pride. "Dr. Harper and I are moving into a luxury loft downtown. I came to Porsche to lease a McCann. They were detailing it, Dave. I was sitting in the lounge drinking sparkling water, and then the finance manager pulled me into his office and looked at me like I was a criminal." I could picture it perfectly. The pristine, glass-walled office at the luxury dealership. Chloe, sitting there in her silk blouses and expensive perfume, crossing her legs and waiting to be handed the keys to a $70,000 status symbol, fully believing her doctor title was a magical skeleton key to the universe. "A criminal?" I asked lightly. "That seems harsh. Did you try telling him about your trajectory?" "He said I have a debt-to-income ratio of 300%. She practically sobbed, the words tumbling out of her in a chaotic rush. "He said my credit profile is a disaster. He told me I have over $220,000 in active student loan debt. He said my grace period is expiring, the interest is capitalized, and I have a monthly payment of nearly $3,000, reporting to all 3 credit bureaus. What did you do to my credit, Dave?" "I didn't do a single thing to your credit, Chloe," I replied smoothly, pulling up the encrypted PDF folder on my desktop just for my own amusement. "You took out student loans to pay for a $250,000 medical degree. Loans have to be repaid. That's generally how the financial sector works. It's a pretty standard operating procedure." "You said you paid for my degree," she yelled. I could hear someone in the background, likely a confused dealership employee, asking if she needed a glass of water. She ignored them. "You told me you were taking care of it. I saw the zero balance on my portal every semester. You lied to me. You stole my life." "Let's review the tape, shall we?" I said, my tone shifting from mild amusement to the cold, hard cadence of a project manager conducting a post-mortem on a failed campaign. "I never, at any point in our 4-year relationship, told you I was paying your tuition out of pocket. You came to me, hyperventilating on our cheap IKEA couch, terrified of the logistical nightmare of financial aid. I promised you that I would handle the burden of the process. I promised I would manage the administration so you could focus on your studies, and I did. You let me sign a master promissory note. I didn't let you do anything. You are a grown woman, a doctor, in fact," I reminded her, throwing her favorite title right back in her face. "I set up the infrastructure. I brought you the digital paperwork. You clicked the boxes. You provided your social security number. You e-signed the master promissory note because it was your degree. The tuition loan was in your name. Why on earth would I take on $250,000 of federal debt for someone else's education?" "Because we were partners," she shrieked, desperate, grasping at the very relationship she had so coldly discarded. "Because you loved me. You told me it was handled. I saw the zero balance. The zero balance on the university portal just meant the school had received the disbursement from your loan servicer," I explained slowly, using the exact tone I used when explaining basic software functions to incredibly dense clients. "It's a ledger, Chloe. The school got paid. The debt was sitting on the servicer's website, a website, I might add, that you had full access to, but never bothered to check because you were too busy buying designer bags on my credit card and complaining about my comfortable, slow lifestyle." There was a ragged, gasping sound on the other end of the line. The reality of her situation was finally breaching the hull of her monumental ego. You planned this," she whispered, the screaming giving way to a horrified, breathless realization. "You knew. You set me up. I didn't set you up, I corrected her. I managed the situation exactly as requested. Now, I will admit, I did have a contingency plan. I spent the last 4 years working 80-hour weeks, wearing holes in my shoes, and driving a car that was actively falling apart. I did all of that to build a massive, high-yield investment portfolio. My original plan, my actual honest-to-God plan, was to pay off your entire principal balance in one single wire transfer on the morning of our wedding. Silence on the other end of the line. Heavy, suffocating silence. I had the cash, Chloe, I continued, twisting the knife with absolute surgical precision. I had every single penny sitting in an account, ready to buy your freedom so you could live your fancy high society life without a care in the world. I was going to hand you a clean slate. But then we went to L'Eclipse. I heard a small, choked sob. You sat across from me, eating a steak I paid for in a dress I bought you, and you called me a stepping stone. You told me I was too slow. You told me my career was a joke and that you needed someone on your level. So I simply adapted to the new parameters of our arrangement. You wanted to step off? Fine. I removed the net. Dave, please, she whimpered. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic groveling terror. Dave, you can't do this. I'm at the dealership. Dr. Harper is looking at me. They're asking for the keys to the loaner car back. I can't afford a $3,000 monthly payment. The cosmetic practice requires a $50,000 junior partner buy-in. If my credit is ruined, I can't get the business loan for the buy-in. If I don't get the buy-in, I lose the job offer. I'll have to go work at a corporate clinic in a strip mall. Dave, you owe me this money. We had an agreement. Actually, we didn't, I said, clicking my mouse and opening the audit trail PDF. I never signed a single document assuming liability for your tuition. You, however, left a very clear digital footprint. August 14th, 4 years ago. 4:12 p.m. IP address matches your old MacBook Pro. MAC address matches. Time on page indicates you scrolled through the terms of service, probably without reading a single word before clicking I agree and typing your full legal name. I'm suing you, she spat, her fears suddenly curdling back into frantic anger. I'll take you to court for fraud. I'll tell everyone what a manipulative, scheming, vindictive loser you are. I'll get a lawyer. I have friends who are lawyers. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It was a loud, genuine, deeply cathartic laugh that echoed off the walls of my beautiful, peaceful office. Go right ahead, Chloe, I chuckled. Please, I am begging you to sue me. Hire the most expensive, high society lawyer you can find on your maxed out credit cards. Go sit in a deposition and tell a judge that you, a highly educated medical professional, blindly e-signed federal and private loan documents for 4 years without reading them. Tell the court that you expected your slow boyfriend to legally gift you $250,000 out of the goodness of his heart with absolutely zero legal obligation or binding contracts. Let me know how quickly the judge laughs you out of the room. You're a monster, she breathed, her voice shaking with absolute venom. You're a sociopath. I'm an operations manager, I corrected her one last time. I identify liabilities and I eliminate them from the workflow. You became a liability. By the way, the grace period ends in exactly 6 months. Interest is capitalizing daily. I'd hand the keys back to Chad, the finance guy, and look into a bus pass. I hear public transit is a fantastic place to network. I didn't wait for her to respond. I reached out, tapped the red button on my screen, and ended the call. I immediately went into my carrier settings and permanently blocked her number. I blocked her iCloud email. I blocked Dr. Harper, just to be safe. I set the phone face down on the desk. The silence in the room was immaculate. I took another sip of my espresso, moved my mouse over to the real estate listing for the duplex, and clicked Contact Agent. I had a closing to schedule, an empire to build, and absolutely nothing slowing me down.